Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video, we'll have an in-depth look into the Caretaker, one of the new items from Brooklyn, as we have finally made it across these bridges onto the other side. As we're looking back onto the Manhattan that we've seen for ages, now we get to explore a new side of the city. And in doing so, there have been a lot of new items, and for those as well, we'll be having a bunch of videos like this one. I'll be making these a little bit shorter than some of the in-depth looks that we have gone through, but I'll be putting out a little bit more frequent for the coming time. Although they'll come at the cost of some of the shorts, but for the coming time, we'll have a video every 2 days. This one about the Caretaker, one of the new items, one that we're getting through having the shepherding system. For instance, my patch there comes from that as well, of course. The Caretaker is a perfect killer. G36 enhanced and has caused quite an uproar as it has come in as the most common question is it better than Lexington? And let's go have a look at that. And to actually introduce the Caretaker, if you're not aware of what it is a G36E with a perfect killer. And of course, as perfect killer, we've already seen it before. It is on the Dark Winter, so it is that same 90%. It has a flavor text of as well. We care for our flock here. And that's also the hint as to where this one came from, as it is from the Shepherding Project, the Gamepass Project that is now in the game. This will be in the game for these 2 weeks, effectively the first week and the second week of the Brooklyn DLC release. And there are in total 8 of these projects. You only see the first one basically when you're starting. This character hasn't done them yet. I don't have actually the wings on this character, the shepherd ranks at all. I did on a separate character. But these projects, there are 8 of them in effect, and some of them also give reconstructed caches, so they're well worth doing, and also exotic components, and also 2 levels worth for each. So that's quite hefty bonuses, of course. And in getting through that and getting to rank 8, you have to basically reach rank 8. When you do that, you get the Caretaker from there. And these are answering call for backups. So that system we'll kind of go into a little bit in how you can kind of cheese it a little bit, as that's actually how I did it, just to get it done quickly. But answering call for backups, we'll complete this project, the final project in the list, basically, which is the 8th one, even though, it doesn't give numbers here. It really should be like, project 1 out of 8. That would have made it so much clearer. But once you reach rank 8, you receive the G36E named, which is the Caretaker. And once you receive it as well, of note, it'll always come God roll effectively with a God roll on it of detox, so damage to targets out of cover. It always comes fully maxed at it. It is, of course, with a perfect talent, so you don't need to recalibrate anything on it. This also makes it really good for people starting out, of course, because this is objectively one of the best weapons you can get early on, because also you're guaranteed, to have the detox one. It's well worth going through those projects, and it can be a hassle, but we'll give a way to kind of cheese it a little bit towards the end, and it'll be timestamped if you want to go to that, jump to that. But then we have to kind of discuss, the big question becomes, how does this hold up against, let's say, a Lexington with killer, or a Famas with killer? And of course, for that, I've made a spreadsheet. We'll look at that in a second. It'll be linked down below as well. But the Caretaker by itself, it is indeed that killer going from 70 to 90% for that perfect. Killer, of course, its activation rate we kind of have to discuss first as well, but because it lasts for 10 seconds, you trigger it on kill, you have to get a crit kill with it. There is actually some, because some people think it's just that 60% that you would have if you're at 60% crit chance, that the activation rate is kind of 60%. It turns out that isn't the case. I'll link to the video as well where I kind of deep dived into discussing the killer activation rate, because it's not just that it's a 40% versus a 60%. That 60% that we can crit with, that crit number is also much larger. So for instance, if your crit number, or the damage that you do with a crit is 2-3 times the size of a non-crit, now the non-crit has to happen several times in a row, because if any of those is a crit, You would basically, if this is the crit and this is the non-crits, you would have to hit several non-crits in a row. But every time you have to, 40% chance of that happening, 40% here, 40% here. If any of those triggers the 60%, much larger crit chance for most of us, that we get this big crit, that's going to get the kill, because that's just going to be the end hit. So because of that, the killer activation rate is much higher than 60%, especially now in this season, where we also have some shenaniganery going on with the modifier, the global modifier, where we can have even higher than 60 crit chance. And yeah, that can make quite a difference here. Although, as well, with this season, we have modifiers that actually increase our crit damage. So that actually also affects the story a little bit. We won't go that in-depth with it here with the modifier. We'll look in that when we go to the modifier. But for now, let's actually go to the weapons on build tables, which I have actually updated. So here the AR one. We've added in the Caretaker, I've added in the Huntsman, we've updated, we've added in Streamline, so those are all in there. We're going to go to the bottom here, and actually let's look at first the G36 versus other weapons before we input a talent. And for that, let's actually zoom in a little bit, of course, here. And if we just take the G36, which is the base weapon, of course, of the Caretaker, and we kind of compare that to some of the other known quantities, as in, for instance, the ones that we recommend quite often in the AR category is, especially if you do have a Lexington, then the Lexington is kind of the best high-end. It is annoying that that is the case, because it's unobtainium at this point, and yeah, we don't have any assurances on if we'll get it ever again. Or they've said quite a few times that they might bring it back. They might do something with it, but yeah, mights are not here yet. For the time being, if you don't have a Lexington, there's no current way to get it. So then usually, yeah, there are ones that we quite often recommend, and here we'll kind of look at the no talents, because yeah, when we're kind of going down this list, this is on build, of course, and then just without the talents. And we can already see, for instance, Lexington is already like ahead of an ACR or a Mark 16 with just Optimus, which is a damage talent on top, of course. That's just without a talent already outcompetes those. But the Famas would be also pretty close to that. That's also the kind of the recommended ones, is the Famas, the Fall, the CTAR, and the F2000. Those four are kind of the guns that I generally recommend. And then especially the P416 and the M4 can be kind of picks as well if you are needing a long rail. Because yeah, the Fall, of course, here has a long rail, but doesn't have the higher RPM for instance, if you want to run it with, let's say, a Heartbreaker or such. But yeah, we have to kind of go even below the M4 there and the Honey Badger to reach the G36. The G36 here without a talent is quite a bit behind, of course, against the Famas and the Lexington. There's a bunch of weapons in between there, but of course here it's getting a better talent. These would have to run normal killer, the Caretaker being this G36 with the same stats is, getting perfect killer. Normal killer is 70 crit damage, perfect killer is 90 crit damage once it is activated. This is also one of the sticking points on this, of course, because killer isn't always activated. You have to get a kill first. So before we actually get that kill, effectively, those weapons are acting as if they have no talent. And that's the big difference here as well. When you're running a Famas or Lexington, your damage is much higher before you activate killer. But as we discussed a second ago, the activation rate on killer is really high, especially if you're solo. So, and getting all of the kills because of that. So it is actually perfectly fine to go with killer. Killer is one of my mainstay picks, actually. I'm either going measured or killer on most of my weapons. But yeah, the Lexington is quite a bit ahead. But then let's go actually to higher up on this list and look at when it is active. And when we look at them at that way where killer is active, now of course we need a kill to trigger activated. The crit chances on these both weapons will be kind of the same because both of them do get, for instance, in this, which is based on an Obliterate Striker effectively, they both get 3 mod slots. They both have 15 crit chance. So we can kind of, we can compare them as is. They're kind of falling side by side, effectively. The Lexington here, I'm doing it this, of course, these calculations are all based on 20% headshot rate. That's kind of just a number that I pick just to not have separate one for full headshot and no headshot. We're just taking 20% as kind of the averaging. That is, of course, important here because headshot and crit damage, where the killer goes into, they're additive to each other. So the more headshot we have, actually, the less well the crit damage, higher crit damage we do, because they're additive to each other, and that reduces the effectiveness of crit damage effectively. So if you have a weapon that is doing more damage just by its base effectively, that's not the talent with that is higher here. Perfect Killer kind of gets reduced actually as we go higher up in the headshot, where we saw the Lexington being ahead by quite a decent percentage, and we'll kind of see the full numbers in a second. Here, just the Perfect Killer and Killer are landing basically side by side. They are effectively the same. But then, of course, yeah, before we activate it, they're quite a bit behind. That is kind of the issue here for Caretaker. It is, at least when we're comparing it to Lexington. Because, of course, if we compare it to, for instance, the other pack, which is, for instance, Famas, F2000, Fall, Citar, yeah, they are a bit behind. So the Caretaker becomes a thing of like, do you have a Lexington? No, go get a Caretaker. Do you have a Lexington? You might be better off just still running the Lexington. Yeah, let's take it actually to that other spreadsheet that actually goes the in-depth part into this. And for that, I've, of course, prepared this spreadsheet. We'll link to this in the description. You can read along there. We'll zoom in already a little bit, although actually first I'll say that it's about 3 multi-calculators, and we're going to go over several builds effectively because, of course, how much crit damage the build has is a really big impact here. The less crit damage the build has, the more it will gain percentually from Killer, because it is a smaller pool, so it's filling up more. Now, in this case, we're going with an Obliterate Striker, kind of as the general pick for most of us. We're going to go with the Umbra. That's the second one, because that has really high crit, so we can kind of see if we really have really high crits, you know, what does that do in between these? And then a Striker Techtank as a build that has less crit than the general Obliterate Striker. All 3 are actually based in kind of the same way, where we have these multi-calculators. If you're not familiar with these, there's a video on my channel that you can go watch. These are multi-calculators of my design. We input down here, we get an output up here, and we're mostly looking at a burst and a sustained DPS number. There's also checking numbers here that I can check in-game to make sure that I've inputted everything correctly, and I've done that, and yeah, they all line up. What we're doing here then is Caretaker, Lexi, and Famas, kind of as the stand-ins, especially Famas, kind of for all of the high-end. Lexington is the Lexington, and then Caretaker, of course, as the new boy on the block. Then first with Killer active in all of these, and then on the second one, it says here, no talent, basically the talent disabled. So here we're just, Killer isn't active yet, because we kind of need to discuss it in that, of course. Here, the Killer is larger for Caretaker, so if it is about the same amounts at its peak, which we kind of see, it's going to be quite a bit behind when it isn't, of course. And yeah, we'll go through that for all 3 of these. And starting out here with the Obliterate Striker. So this build is effectively this, just an Obliterate Striker with a Coyote. The Coyote we're keeping just on 15 to 25, just for all of them as a comparison point. This is the bog standard 51-141 that we set it up as. Here with the Caretaker, then the Lexington, and then as well a Famas in there, just as a kind of stand-in for some of the high ends, as being one of the higher high ends. Taking it to that top multi-calculator, when Perfect Killer is kind of active, and here as well, we're still on 100% headshot rate. We see actually that the Lexington is actually a percentage point ahead on burst, but a little bit behind on sustain, and that comes down to a lower RPM for Caretaker and a better and the Lexington still kind of keeps up with around the same reload, but a better reload actually in the Lexington's case. That lower RPM makes it a longer firing time, so from that it can sustain more. But of course, if we're using it on Striker, this is quite a higher RPM than this. Not by the large margins. This isn't, let's say, an FAMAS versus an ACR or such, or a Mark 16 or AK, where there's a very large difference. These are basically each dropping where the base on the FAMAS is 900, the base on the Lexington is 850, and 750 on the Caretaker, which is a G36. That does make a difference in stacking. It isn't that large of a difference. It is noticeable though. So there is a downside there, especially if we're looking at it for stacking purposes here on Striker. But on the other hand, because of that lower RPM, we do gain better sustain on it because we're reloading less often, especially when we compare it to the FAMAS. The FAMAS, of course, here versus it is kind of behind, and that's kind of the deal here as well. It's, again, kind of this story. If you have a Lexington, go with the Lexington. If you're competing against a FAMAS or any other weapon that you kind of like running with Killer, then it might be a consideration because, yeah, here the FAMAS is behind on burst when Killer is active. It's behind by 10% on sustain, especially because the reload on it is so much longer and it's faster firing, so it's hitting that reload, of course, much more often. Then we have to kind of look at it as well with the talent turned off effectively. This is before we trigger Killer. What numbers do we see then? Because that also matters. We know that Killer, the perfect Killer is of course 90 versus that 70. So the amount that it adds, that the talent adds, as we have that on the side here, is, for instance, for the perfect is 20% between this number and this number. This is effectively the difference between this and that. And then 15% when it isn't the perfect version. And that does make a difference because now the Lexington is quite a bit ahead. And this is the reason why I would say that the Lexington has the Caretaker beat. Plus, the Lexington also handles quite a bit better. Because in here, of course, we're talking about the hard stats, the RPMs, the damages and such. We're not talking so much about the soft stat, the accuracy, the stability and such, but that definitely is there. But I would say that the G36, the Caretaker, does handle foremost a little bit better than the FAMAS. The FAMAS is a lot more accurate. If you can handle its recoil, it will land more shots on target. But for a lot of people, especially if you're, I feel, on console, people don't like the FAMAS that much because it has a very sharp recoil that goes up pretty high. So the G36 is a little bit more handleable on its recoil, but is less accurate. And here, then as well, the Killer talent, of course, being smaller effectively on the FAMAS when it's behind there. It is ahead here, but it isn't that much, it isn't catching up on the sustain end. And that does make a difference because the top and bottom of our theoretical damage here being the top being burst, the bottom being sustain, that's, you know, the G36 will quite quickly overtake the FAMAS, especially when we trigger Killer and kind of overtake it, quite fast. If we take this to 20% headshot, which is much more the numbers I would go with, honestly, is around the 20% headshot rate. Now we see that, the gain that we have from the talent went up by quite a bit. This was in the 20s and the 15s. Now already the normal version is already as well 20 and 26% for the perfect here. When we do that as well, the effectiveness of Killer going up effectively in comparison, crit is more valuable effectively. Now that difference between the Caretaker and Lexington, when it is activated, is gone effectively. Here we have the same burst. The sustain is, of course, even falling a little bit more behind for the Lexington, but the FAMAS here as well, falling even more behind, and we're even over the 10% behind. So I would say, especially when we're looking at it, and of course these numbers on the non-perfect or on the non-Killer activated stay the same percentually because nothing changed there. Because when it is the talent isn't active, there is actually no crit damage difference between them. Of course, they're equivalent to each other, all of them. So yeah, these percentages stay the same. The difference is especially that we gain more from the talent there. And going off to these numbers, yeah, the conclusion of this video basically is, yeah, if you have a Lexington, go with the Lexington with Killer, and then also you can go put measured on it. Because Killer isn't the tool for every place, especially if you're, if you're shooting, let's say, at Buddy and Lucy, what else are you killing to trigger Killer, right? You might as well have a talent, because if you're inactive, yeah, you would rather have, instead of this 20%, let's say that we get here, difference that you get from Killer, you might as well go with like the 13-14% that measured gives you, but consistently and without that kill pre-triggered. So situationally, the Caretaker, of course, can't be anything but killer. Lexington can go to measured, can go to flatline, can go to even sadist if you wanted to go that route, but Caretaker can't. But when we compare it against Famas, F2000, and basically F2000, Fall, and Cetar are below the Famas, so effectively all of those are below here, and then the Caretaker kind of becomes the mainstay choice. And let's take it to the second chapter of this play, the second part of this play. It's more of the same, we kind of see, and this is then on Umbra. To show the build, before we go into the numbers here, it's just the box standard. Umbra here with the Fenris backpack, with Vigilance, with Coyote, Caretaker, or the other guns as applicable. And yeah, 4 pieces of Umbra, kind of set up to be set up for the mid-range of the Coyote, as we see there. So we're taking these stats and kind of inputting them here, but also we're treating as if Umbra is always at full. So we see a really high RPM, much more so than we're used to, because of course at full stacks, Umbra gives us 40% rate of fire, a 1.4 multiplier. Then as well, we get a ton of crit from it, 120 at full stacks. Now, of course, Umbra isn't always at full stacks and such, but here we're kind of more concerned about how the weapon talent works. So we're kind of, the Umbra parts we're just keeping at full stacks, acting as if they're all the way full. And then what we see is actually that the talent, of course, the talent pool of it, although here at 100%, again, headshot rate, we'll alter that in a second, but those numbers dropped. So this used to be a 15% for the non-perfects at 100% headshot, and 20%-ish for the perfect version. Now that equivalent, the same talent in percentages is giving less in return. This is the diminishing returns we kind of talk about. When we're pushing up one stat quite a lot, it might behoove you, for instance, to go with a different choice. Now, in the case for Umbra as well, the other choice we would often have on weapons would be measured, but that as well is kind of going into weapon damage, total weapon damage, and the rate of fire that also gets affected by Umbra. So Killer still makes for a good package here, even with its reduced numbers, because yeah, those numbers are also, of course, getting, especially the rate of fire from measured is also getting affected. And those two are still ahead of most of the other talents, so you would consider them in that way. Then if we look again at full numbers here, the Lexi is actually quite a bit more ahead, because our crit damage number is higher, the effectiveness of Killer is less, and that extra 20% we get is less effective effectively. And we see that in here. Now, even on sustain, the Lexington is ahead. And the Famas even is catching up and being on the same number on burst, but of course still quite a bit behind on sustain. This makes it so that if you're, again, if you have the Lexi, I would go to Lexi. If you're going Famas or something below it, then I would definitely consider going the Caretaker route. And even on the talent being inactive, as we have it here, there, the Lexington is now that same 5% ahead that it was. If we take this now to 20% headshot rates, just to take it to closer to realistic numbers, we see that the percentages there jumped up in relation to how much the talent gains from you. But also now the Lexington lost a little bit because we're gaining more from that Killer, that 20% difference in Killer. We're gaining more from it versus the Famas as well, and they drop a little bit. But of course, the Lexington is just straight up ahead, I would say here. Plus, again, it handles better, which is also a really big part of that story. Let's take it to this last one, which is actually in the other direction. And for the third act of this play, we're taking it the other direction. What if we have less crit damage? Here, in this case, with a Striker Techtank. Now, the Striker Techtank is, of course, this kind of layout where we are kind of taking a Memento, and together with Technician and an Artificer, we're healing up this shield. We have a 2-tier Artificer healing a 6-tier shield. One of my favorite builds for running solo. If we stick a Caretaker in here or a Lexington with Killer, now in general, actually, in these kind of builds, I would take Flatline most of the time. Although actually with the Striker Techtank, I've been leaning towards the Chameleon. That fits in really well here. But if we go the Killer route, what do we get then? Because now the crit is, of course, lower. Starting again with a 100% headshot rate, the numbers are bigger than the the original striker that we saw at 100% headshot rate. Now the difference already, even at 100%, is smaller between the Lexington and the Caretaker here. And we see actually with the talent off, it's exactly the same numbers that we saw earlier with the striker, because yeah, we're just changing that crit damage. That is effectively, you know, that's the only difference between them. The Caretaker is when the talent is active, it's gaining more 20% more crit damage. So these numbers will effectively be the same because they're kind of landing on the same crit damages between them. If we take this again as well, to 20% headshot rate as a much more fair comparison, I feel, yeah. Now, because the crit is so much lower here, we see actually that we're getting 29%. If we kind of go back all the way up there, that was 26% on the other striker with a little bit more crit damage, not excessively more. But yeah, those returns kind of go up a little bit. And here is one of the first instances that we actually see that although not by much, not by a significant number, because also if we actually drop it to 0% headshot, we're of course kind of leaning in the other way, and now, you know, we gain even more from perfect killer versus normal killer. But here we kind of see the first place where the Lexington is actually behind on burst, the first instance of this, and this is of course really dependent on build. And that's kind of the point here that I'm trying to make. It's going to depend on build, how effective the differences is, how much you kind of rely on hitting heads. Because if we, for instance, as well, take this number to 0, then yeah, it leans even more towards the perfect killer. Not by much though, because that's always the thing here. The Lexington and the Caretaker kind of land around the same ballpark when killer is active, but they are quite a bit apart, and 5% I would say is quite a bit apart when that talent is inactive. And let's indeed quickly discuss how we actually get this weapon in full, as we get it from this Gamepass project. Now, with this character, I've already reached that point where I've gotten already a Caretaker. We are Shepherd rank 10. Now we know that actually we need to reach Shepherd rank 7. Instead of the 8 that I said at the start, as yeah, I'm recording this actually a day after that, as also we'll discuss in a second why. But yeah, you need to effectively reach the end of this project list. What this project is kind of like in the same way of the Harvest and the Handbasket and First Sight and several others that we've had like that, where we've had, you know, projects that were in those cases unlocking per day, and there was one final one that we could repeat over and over again. This is that exact same way, except everything's unlocked at the start. So we can go all the way through it, reaching the 7th project. Once we complete the 7th project, this is this one, this unmarked SHD supplies, that is the Caretaker. And of course, at every step as well, we're getting levels, we're getting some reconstructed caches along the way. There seems to be 5 if you're doing the full list on a character. So, well, we're getting just for that as well, for those hunting the blueprints that, you know, normally you would only get from Descent. And also each one of these gives 10 exotic caches. Somewhat like all of those projects that are listed as well, that last one, every day, it seems to be resetting. But also it seems to just be resetting randomly here and there. We haven't really found out exactly how it is working like that, but at the very least, each day you could repeat it and get another Caretaker on that character. This is per character, so yeah, you could do it over multiple characters, getting up in those Shepherd ranks, and in doing so, yeah, getting in total, if you do it on all 4 characters, it seems to be 5 reconsidered caches, so you would get 20 of those, 70 exotic components. This is kind of a hefty reward, together with the Caretakers, of course. If you are just after the Caretakers and you want multiple, because likely just one is enough for most people if you're just running one character. If you're running multiples, you could just repeat it on one character over and over again, just doing it the next day and the next day and the next day. And each time you will get, in the same way as with those like Harvest and Handbasket, you will get a fresh Caretaker. And yeah, they always come guard rolled with their perfect talent, of course. So it's also really good for newer players because this is a weapon, you know, guaranteed detox guard roll together with a good talent. So, you know, you don't need to spend anything on optimizations or farming for that perfect weapon. This would be a perfect candidate for people starting out as well. From the project as well, when you get it, it is shareable. So you could even help people out once you have enough, maybe, even just giving it to newer players that way that are doing the call for backup. Or of course you can, for instance, even if you answer a call for backup and you're not per se cheesing it, you could actually invite, before you get the endorsement, a friend from your friends list that really wants to have it and maybe doesn't have the time to do it. And then once you reach the endorsement part and you receive that caretaker, it is shareable with anybody in the group, so you could share that to them as well. So yeah, there's a bunch of ways of working around this project. And yeah, we need to reach Shepherd rank 7 at the very least. Here I've done it as well one other day as well. They've changed the shepherding system in points-wise. So in the past, it used to be basically you would get one endorsement automatically. Once you reach the XP threshold, you would get another one. If the player endorsed you, they'll get a pop-up, and they can also do it from their social money afterwards if they missed the pop-up. And you would get what I'm going to call now 1 point each. So at most, you would get 2 points per call for backup. And also, every time you join a player, you basically could only get 2. If you remained in that session, you would not continue to accrue shepherding points. That is still the case. You only get 2 per join. So after you get your endorsement, if you're just hunting this, you're best off to leave. They've changed that 1 point at base to be 2 now. So now you would get 4 in total if you get the automatic one and the endorsement. And there's, of course, now a 3 times XP event going on. So in total, you actually get 2 6s. So the automatic one is worth 6, a 2 times 3. And the endorsement from the player as well on top is a 2 times 3 once you've reached that threshold. So you can get 12 points each time. The first level is 15. Once you also complete the first level, then you can answer call for backups from players that are below your level. Before that, you won't see any blue ones, which is players that are at lower level. And that pool, of course, is a little bit larger. And that's just to, keep the riffraff out of helping the newer players. But once you reach that 15 of points of the first SHD or Shepherd rank, then you get access to lower level players, and also each subsequent one from that point on is only 7. So we're getting 12, so we're getting more than a rank, or well, if we are getting endorsed, we're getting more than a rank that way. Now, of course, currently the matchmaker is kind of full because everybody's trying to answer call for backups, and nobody's, not enough people are sending out call for backups to keep up with the stream. They should have made this project effectively adding a twin where you also get something for getting, sending out a call for backup and then endorsing a player maybe, and maybe you get a few exotic components that way. That would have alleviated this system quite a bit, because currently everybody's trying to just matchmake out to try to, be on the shepherd side of things and not so much on the sheep end. But there are some tricks you can use there. And to discuss that, we have to actually talk about one mechanic of shepherding, which is that you cannot gain endorsements from people that are on your friends list or in your clan list. So for someone like me that has way too many people on their friends list, this is actually kind of annoying. So when I answer call for backups, the system will actually prioritize people that are on your friends list. And if any of my people that are on there, they do a call for backup, then I will likely join them. And they can't endorse me. The system just doesn't allow for that. And that's likely there to avoid, people cheesing it. But they should just allow that at this point, just especially for clan, because in the clan list is the same. There, of course, people might be in the same clan, but you might not even really know each other. It might be just an open clan that is available to all. So they should actually open up that system, I feel. But what we can do to work around that, although I'll state here that it is very inconsistent. And that's also why I'm recording this on a future day than the other parts, as we couldn't get it to work consistently yesterday when I was trying to record it. And that is to remove each other from the friend list. So, of course, if you are friends with each other, you couldn't get endorsed. But what if you just avoid that? You can remove each other from each other's friends list. If one person removes the other, both will no longer be friends with each other. According to the game, you can still be friends in real life. And then what you can do is, especially if you group up afterwards, we found that to be the most consistent way, but then still not always consistent. If you group up together and then especially go to a DZ checkpoint so that you at that point are in a smaller session, especially filled with, you know, DZ players, which are likely not calling for backup. When you do that together, then disband, and yeah, you can / invite each other to get together. I'm not sure if that works on console. I didn't check actually, but especially on PC, yeah, you definitely can do / invite and then player name, and that is the way to group up. Firstly, go to DZ checkpoint, disband, and then go into the open world, because actually in the checkpoint, you shouldn't call for backup there, as that kind of breaks the system. Go out into the open world somewhere, just fast travel somewhere out there, and then try to time together. And this is why it is handy to maybe be on voice together. Try to time together when one person match makes and the other person calls for backup. So you can, from the menu here, you can match make for random call for backup. And the other person from the SHD menu, they can call for backup. It's actually, it's kind of behind me, but yeah, it's down there. So by timing that together and putting ourselves into the same session, in the past, this used to be very consistent, but back then the matchmaker likely wasn't as swamped as it is now. So your mileage may vary here a little. We have gotten it to work pretty consistently a few days ago. That's also how I've gotten mine pretty quickly. And I've helped. And in return, basically what you can do here as well is, if you don't have anybody really readily available, you could see in some LFGs in some of the Discords and see if, you know, I'll scratch your back if you'll scratch mine, and then trade effectively in this way. Once you, because usually the first one is the hard one to get together. And if you do, once you're together, after you get the endorsement and leave, it will generally be very consistent afterwards. So it's usually that first one that is kind of hard. Once you're kind of in the same session, once you have reached your point of endorsement, the player that is getting endorsed, they can leave after they get their points. And then if you do it again, kind of time it together to have the call go out and the matchmaking happen at around the same time, you generally find each other right away again. So once you get it going, it's kind of ongoing. And yeah, you can very quickly get through some of this. It seems to be based on kill XP, actually, and this is something that I wasn't aware of in the past. I always assumed it was just completion XP, but that's also, when I, for instance, have gotten my patch from 25, that was all the way back in year 2, so a long time ago. And yeah, it does seem to be based on kill XP, so doing stuff that gets a lot of kills. So we've been going, for instance, after convoys, after control points. Although missions likely will also be really good, especially I would think, for instance, Lincoln or a DUA, where a lot of stuff spawns. There you could go and yeah, very quickly get an endorsement in there. You could, of course, even do some of the Brooklyn missions and such. Once you're together, yeah, then it's kind of seems pretty consistent. But that first time getting together has been very inconsistent for us yesterday. And that's why also, yeah, I don't have the exact footage for it here. But yeah, we have seen the system work. You now know how it can kind of work. And also, if people know better ways for this, maybe leave it down below, as this is definitely a system that I haven't threaded into more recently. So I'm kind of rusty on it. So if there's new and informed ways of getting this to be very consistent, yeah, put it in the comments for us all to help out, and I might even pin it up there. So yeah, let's move on to our conclusion. And to conclude this video on the Caretaker, this new addition, it is definitely an interesting one, a really good tool to get. And yeah, the mechanics through is kind of annoying that it is through a timed event again. That's my biggest issue with this. This is, again, a time-gated weapon. So while it is, especially for those that don't have the Lexington, definitely one to get, and you would want to get this and have it. Even with having the Lexington, I will try to get one, especially on main account, one for each character, because of course at the end of the day I only have 2 Lexingtons, as you know, as most people do, or one even, or none. We can get more than that from here. So I will likely try to get one for each character at the very least, and then maybe even one for the stash to grade up and have in there. This being a time-gated event again, it kind of sucks. I do hope that they put the Caretaker, the Lexington, and maybe the Terminal as well. They are the perfect targets to put into some stretch goals, maybe towards the end of the season, but maybe even put them somewhere evergreen. And what we mean with that, as some games have that terminology, is somewhere where you can always get it. It isn't seasonal or such. It isn't tied to a certain thing. You can always get them because, yeah, a weapon like this, the Caretaker with Perfect Killer, is a worthwhile tool to go for. This is one of the best talents on a mid-tier weapon, but it elevates that mid-tier weapon quite high. Especially it also being on a G36E, it is one of the better G36s and the preferred one overall, I would say. Handling-wise, of course, it is a little worse than the Lexington, and then on the numbers-wise, we saw it is effectively around the same burst. It is a lower RPM, so especially on Striker, it is going to affect it a little bit that it is a lower RPM, and because of that, it isn't stacking as fast. But then on the sustain end, it is actually a little bit above the Lexington. So if that's a consideration for you, or you're doing content that is much more sustain-sided of things, then you could even make an actual case for this. But I would say, yeah, the handling, especially of the Lexington, is somewhat better. But especially if you don't have a Lexington, this is a much better handler than the Famas or the F2000. The Fall or the Cetar, I would say, are definitely kind of on par, but they would also be lower than the Famas. So as we saw in the numbers, the Famas is already below it. So this is one to go for. Definitely, it is worthwhile. It isn't better than the Lexington, I would say. But it is definitely competitive with the Lexington. And what I will likely do is actually, yeah, keep this on Killer, maybe keep the Lexingtons on Measure. Then I also don't have to recalibrate them each time because this is more than good enough. This is one of the top contenders. And yeah, this will be an easy one to proficiency up as we'll just run it and get it to that top level. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video of us going through the numbers of this Caretaker. As yeah, this was one of the most requested, and yeah, I even ran a poll of if we're doing this one first or if we're doing Streamline first, and yeah, this one won by quite a mile. So the next one as well will be Streamlined, as we'll go into that, we're talking about both the normal talent and of course the two names, and go over those numbers as well, and that'll follow this one up in 2 days. As for the coming a few weeks, or likely the coming week at the very least, I'll actually just be putting out a main video every 2 days, as yeah, there's a bunch of things I'm going to discuss, as we'll have to go also through the global modifier and some other things, of course, and even eventually and my thoughts on Brooklyn in a week or two, as you know, I feel I might have something to share there. So yeah, I hope you join me for those. If you did enjoy this one, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below, and as always, have a good night.